Hi, welcome back to Inside the Studio. I'm here today with Marjolyn van der Hart in her beautiful studio in Toronto. So here we are. We were going to do this interview a while ago, but unfortunately COVID had other plans for us.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
It's awesome. It's awesome to be here. You know, I've followed you closely for a while now, and of course your work is really intriguing, as I'm sure.
Thank you.
Your accomplishments and awards and recognition speak for themselves, right?
Thank you, Joanne. It's lovely.
Yeah, awesome. But your father was an artist, and so how much of an influence did that have on your development?
Well, I grew up in an artist's life. My father, we immigrated from Holland in late 60s, and he began his art career in the early 70s and really built a reputation in the Oakville area. He was a watercolor artist, and he built a gallery adjacent to the house and traveled and went traveling with him to do art fairs and
Lovely.
galleries, and yeah, so it's a big influence. Yeah.
What was your father's name?
John van der Hart.
Okay,
Yeah.
lovely, lovely. And was he an artist in Europe, or did he?
Not so much. I mean, he was an entrepreneur. He had his own business there, and I think he came here and just loved the landscape and was really tempted by the Group of Seven and loved that work. And he did his own interpretation of that with watercolors. So he did a good job with it, yeah.
So what you do is obviously different than what your father did, dramatically so, right?
Yeah, so I am an artist, but I decided that I will be a very different artist than he is or was. And so I started working more with figurative and narratives and story, and I also moved away. I went and lived in the States for several years. Because he was so well known, every time I would show, people would mention him. And so it was really trying to find my own identity as an artist that kind of evolved. And once I left, I was able to evolve more as my own identity, my own reputation. And then I came back in the mid or late 90s, and then, kind of find my own space that way.
So you had some pretty cool opportunities. Parsons, of course, is a pretty big deal, as is the Ringling School. And why there? What were your choices along the way in your development?
So I have originally I have a degree from Carleton University in Ottawa in mass communications, and in that degree I focus primarily on art and how art makes meaning, and how we're affected by different types of media. So that's where I started. And then when I finished that degree, I wanted to create art that would convey some type of messaging of women and empowerment of women and some kind of social movement. And so I started showing my work. And one of the things that I found was that I was really quite limited in my knowledge of materials and that kind of thing. So I was showing in the States, and I decided to go back down to the States and go to school down there and get a fine arts degree. So I went to the Ringling School of Art in Florida, and through that art school, that renowned art school, I got an opportunity to study in New York City at the Parsons School of Art, which is now the New School of Social Research. And worked as an independent study type of program with different notable critics and artists, and developed a body of work there, and then launched that, and then finished school, and then started working as an artist. And so it's the pieces kind of melded together so that I had the theoretical background and framework that I had learned quite deeply at Carleton, and then applied it to a visual type of materials, which is where the work kind of evolved. And when I was at school, I was working a lot with paper casting. So I created interior scapes by casting architectural motifs and that kind of thing through the layers of tissue paper.
Talking about some of her source material that she uses in her artwork. So, right away, this pattern thing takes me back to the days when I was having handmade costumes from home.
Yeah.
But where else are you sourcing your materials, or what are you doing?
So the tissue paper, the fabric patterns are great because they're transparent, so they're tissue. So when they land on the surface, the images underneath still come through, and there's this map making effect. And it is a feminine type of process, right, of sewing.
And why colored? Why do you use
So
colored?
when I work with colored tissue paper, it's actually like working with glazing of paint.
Okay.
So when you layer in one color on top of the other, you get different colors
Okay.
that you wouldn't necessarily get with brushwork.
Right.
It also has a geometric kind of effect that I can create underneath and create more of these architectural spaces. That's a premise of my work. So I work with that. Then I work with vintage postcards, and I collect them while I'm traveling to art fairs in the U.S. And I'll stop at antique malls and just start hunting for different cards. This collection actually was given to me because I haven't been able to travel, by an artist friend who had them stashed away, and he graciously gave them to me. And they're all going to the same person, the postcards.
Oh,
So it's
cool.
really wild. And then we've got the vintage old magazines, which I flip through and find images and text, and then rework those into the imagery. So I'll mark certain types of images. I don't actually use the actual imagery. I always take scans of them because this material can yellow. It's not acid free.
Okay.
So I always reproduce and do some type of photocopying and reworking them.
Yeah.
So there's different. So those are my main sources. I do work also with classic films. So the television is behind me. I'll have classic films actually playing while I work a lot of the time. So, which is awesome. So I've always got that voice of that 1950s or 60s kind of space working. And if there's a great film, like An American in Paris, for instance, I'll stop it, take some shots of it, then rework those images within the collage. So it's kind of the process. The work that I do now is a complete link. It's a direct link to
Wow,
that, right?
fantastic.
Because I layer with tissue paper. I create these ephemeral type of transparent kind of spaces. I'm working within the same themes that I had theoretically developed when I was at Carleton. So it took me, though, it took me 25 years of figuring out, oh yeah, we can kind of work that way. Because artists work on a subconscious level. You can intentionally go, okay, I'm going to do that. But really, it comes from another place that kind of works in the background, and then it percolates to the surface. And if you're lucky, you can understand what you're doing, how it relates to the bigger picture of your life and the stimuli in your work and your intentionality.
So you've been lucky because you were able to take that information, understand it, reinvent it, rediscover it, and question it, and go forward into your practice, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Was the female people in your life influential in some of this desire to focus on the feminine?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong mom, very independent woman, but I think my father was always the person who said, yeah, you can do this. You can do this on your own. You don't have to have any help from anyone. You can do this. So yeah, my mom was very strong, but what's interesting, it was his voice that always said, so if you have to change a tire, you can change the tire. so
Awesome.
Okay, and that is
Awesome.
that entrepreneurial kind of piece of empowerment as a child, I think, has driven me to really show quite extensively in the States, to build an independent artist practice. I don't rely on galleries. I don't rely on designers or whatever. I love working with consultants, but that's not my main source. My main source are the very highly judged and juried art fairs that I work in the U.S. And then I work a little bit here in Canada, but most of what I sell is down there in these huge marketing events. So that forthrightness of trying to redefine the business sense as an artist came from my parents and came from that acknowledgement that, yeah, so you're a woman, you're not represented in museums, you won't be seen a lot in art galleries, so how do you get to your client and your collector?
So great.
Right?
So
So
great.
you can only do that by saying, okay, where are the gatekeepers? Well, if I can't get into through a dealer in an art gallery, I have to find my client. So how do I find my client? I go to an art fair. Yes, I have to jury through, but it's blind jury. They don't know I'm a woman. In fact, when I apply, sometimes I put more of a male kind of male name on it, and it's enabled me to have a little bit more reputation.
So the art fairs are fairly prestigious. You know, New York, LA, some of the yeah, I noticed you're now going to be in San Diego, and you're still doing the traditional shows in Toronto, like Riverdale and Cabbagetown and those kinds of things to keep your voice here. But kudos to you for getting outside of Canada. I don't think that's a bad idea.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a big world out there, right? And I think as artists, you know, one of the main pieces is that so many people say, no, you can't do this. You can't survive doing this. And when someone says no to me, that's usually like, okay, so let's just figure that piece out.
There's Dad's voice.
So yeah, pretty well. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you know, when I'm looking at your work and trying to understand A, process, but B, story, and you said that your work isn't necessarily about a story, it's about an emotion. And your feeling is that the emotion comes from memory. Is that what you're driving at?
Right. So I work with memory as a lens. I work with nostalgic imagery as a lens to interpret our present day. So it's a type of vocabulary which we can get drawn into as a viewer and go, oh, that reminds me of that.
For sure.
But then it takes you into a different level, right? It then relates to, oh, in our context of today. So many of my collectors, they look at, oh, it reminds me of such and such. And then when I speak a little bit more about it, they look at it, oh, yeah, like this is about this. This piece, for instance, I mean, is very... course, in the context of where we are today and what we've just gone through the last couple of years, this plays into that space of, well, did we actually live through a reality, or was this a dream that we just went through, right? This whole concept of escaping and finding another place. It's inspired by a vintage postcard. I collect old postcards and then enlarge the different pieces to it. But underneath you can see
The
vintage pieces coming through.
The texture and the layers.
Yeah, there's texture and layers. So when I create a piece, I first do all collage of old vintage materials. I don't really know what the image will be. Then I layer tissue paper on top of that with gel medium, so there's this transparency, gives me a coloring.
And is that a twofold reason that you do that, or is it strictly a technical process that you are, because it's fairly symbolic that you are layering something upon something else?
Right. It's very much in the sense of how memory works.
Correct.
Right? We have a thought, we suppress it, and then we reveal it. So yes, it's that layering of suppress, reveal, and then there's a new image.
For sure. And so you collect vintage postcards. What other kinds of images do you collect? Like,
so I work with old magazines, of course, in the 1950s and 60s. And then I also work with classic film images. So I'll watch old films and take images from them and then rework these. Yeah. So I will go through magazines and just slice out different images which I feel that I can use as reference or that can be put into
but what is this one here with the three guys here?
So a big part of my work is about watching or being watched, right? So I love images where people are looking and watching somebody else doing something, right?
The observer.
Yeah. Or the text, so you have different forms of text, which then I layer under, and that can guide narratives as well.
Cool. It's all rather intriguing, and I think that you're very clever in that you have figured out that in order to sell work or be successful, you do have to tap into the emotion aspect of the piece.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're because your work is nostalgic. You're tapping into a pretty large market, maybe an art buying market.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's a very, I think in our day and time, understanding how history and identity is made up from memories. And as there's this real increase of dementia and Alzheimer's, there is this ephemeral feel of like, who are we and where we came from? And this work plays into that realm of identity and who we are and where we source from. But it also gives a real warm feeling. Nostalgia has this warm, comforting space. It's not jarring. It's story, it's narrative. So you can get involved in it and just escape into it. So it's not decorative, it's beyond that. It works in a little bit of an intellectual and an emotional kind of space.
For sure. Do your buyers understand that?
Oh, I think so.
Do they?
Yeah. I think there's an initial kind of sense, oh, look at it. And then as they delve into the themes and what I'm doing, then there's a real sense of empowerment and strength and understanding. Yeah, for sure.
Memory is memory. So unpleasant memories can become obliterated in a sense, and we turn negative things into our mind into something that possibly is nice that we want to remember, right?
Right. The goal is to create imagery that is universal. So people ask me, are these your memories? They're not my memories. There's more of a sense of story of how it relates to everybody. So that memory is we have this kind of collective understanding of what something is, right? So I try and play into that and try to understand that. I'll create pieces where I'll finish it and I go, okay, it's just too narrow. It just doesn't have a wider scope to it. And then it will be, revised. So
what about the juxtaposition we're in now, where we are in this social media evolution or revolution, and how I'm trying to think about how you're able to fit that sense of nostalgia into this rapidly changing world that we're in. Have you thought about that?
Yeah. The disposable imagery that happens in our life, that's all relating to that, right? This ephemeral kind of, the image is there and then it's gone. So all this work plays into that, trying to possess and own that, right? To maintain it and to bring it back. And I think that there's a real resurgence of looking back at that, right? The old photo albums, classic films, Turner Classic Movies, like that whole sense of those easy stories to understand and this romanticism of memory. So that, I think that all plays a part in it as well. Yeah.
And do you, just quickly, do you use color, and how important is color in your work? Or when you think about a memory, it perhaps is not in color?
So this series is all about trying to simplify and light and create this lightness. So there's a lot of white in the series of pieces. I work with the colors of these Kodachrome movies from the late 50s. I love that tonality. So the blues, the turquoises with a pop of orange, right? If you watch an old film from that back then. So I'm very aware of that. But consciously, this group of work, which is called The Road to Nowhere, was all about, okay, how do we make lightness and how do we simplify? How do we not fill up every piece of the space with something, right? Let's have some kind of meditative space that we have calmness and quiet, but still a story.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Sharing your journey. I'd love to speak with you more about it. It sounds fascinating, but I wish you continued success.
Thanks.
And as you go forward into your exciting opportunities in the U.S. and what you're going to be doing locally in the city. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joanne. Thank you very much.